Hello, everyone, and welcome to Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans. Today, we have a special guest joining us, Reverend Dawn Adams, the senior minister at First Congregational Church, Wolfborough, UCC, who was ordained in 2015, served her last setting over 10 years, and has been in ministry for her whole life. Our discussion will focus on callings and how her teenage years shaped her into the minister she is today. So, without further ado, let's jump right into our conversation.
You're listening to today's leaders, from teens to titans. Hi, I'm Lorraine Connell, a teen leadership coach. I transitioned from teaching chemistry to coaching teens in leadership, helping them realize they can do hard things. We've often believed that leadership is an innate trait, but it's actually a skill that you build and improve. On this show, you'll meet today's leaders who share their teenage experiences, revealing how they developed confidence, direction, and the tools to become the leaders they are now. You'll discover how you or the teens in your life have the potential to become confident leaders, even if it doesn't seem possible.
Welcome, Dawn.
Hi, Lorraine. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming. All right. So, as a teen leadership coach, I want to empower teens to see themselves as leaders. That's often the biggest hurdle for teens. They don't see themselves as leaders. So, can you describe yourself as a teen and share if you saw yourself as a leader at that point, or when did you start to develop into knowing and being the leader that you are today?
So I think that I've always had leadership capacity, and others have identified me as a leader because partially is how you see yourself, but also how others receive you and embolden you to a degree. And so, yes, I would say in my teenage years, I was a leader, but there is no end to learning leadership skills. So there is a part of leadership which has perhaps some innateness, but maybe not. Maybe it's something that you lean into more. And as you lean into it, you learn additional skills which help you act in that space better and better. I think it's a consistently growing edge. And I know I have more to learn even now at 54.
I couldn't agree more. And I think most of my platform and discussion with the people that I work with is the importance of continuing to grow into your leadership skills and develop them, and not be, I'm a leader, so I already have all the skills that I need. So I think it's really important that you identified that.
And I would say one thing on that is that I also recognize that what a leader was defined at when I was 16, 17 years old is very different than what society necessarily calls a leader today. And so when I think about that, I think that's fascinating because some of the leadership skills that I have developed and leaned into and learned, if I could get in a time machine and blast myself back, might not even be identified as leadership skills, but they absolutely are today. The idea of collaboration rather than hierarchy, the ideas of getting consensus rather than dictatorial, autocratic perspective, which is what the paradigm was then. And I think that's true today too. So I think it's important to know that sometimes when you're on the edge of development, when you yourself see something that should be done different, trust that in your own self, that you have been given a gift that maybe the whole world hasn't seen yet, and that give it some time. Maybe you will make the change, or maybe you will find the world around you changing as well.
That insight is so impactful and simple. Not easy, but simple. And I'm curious if you were able to identify the skills that you were developing when you were 16. Did you know what you were doing? Did you know that they were going to evolve into being something that supported you in the leader that you are today?
I think because of my upbringing and my family of origin, I absolutely was pushed into leadership, but that's also where I name that some of what my family of origin identified as leadership wasn't necessarily what I would define as leadership. And interestingly, one of the things that I've had to learn, especially within the course of ministry, but throughout my life, is maybe to tone down. If you get into different conflict styles and behavioral styles, I tend to have some sharp edges. I was taught to be the steamroller, to push forward, to move the agenda, to be a mover and a shaker. Those are all words that were very 1980s. That is not necessarily what I think of as a leader today. And so some of my leadership growth has been letting go of some of those skills so that I can listen better, so that I can reflect, take more time for reflection, so that I can respond, just letting someone else know that I heard what they said and help them trust that it's somehow going to be incorporated in what's coming out the other side. And so I've had to move further into collaboration and consensus and team building. Again, all new things. So I think it's really important to trust both what you see and know from those that came before you, but also that when you might be pushed to the outside for the way you do it, the reality is maybe you are on the prophetic edge of something new that's coming. And so trust in yourself. Continue to find like-minded people. And I find that helpful because when you feel like you're an outsider, you feel like you're doing something wrong or outside the norm or something. You're pushed to the margins. And suddenly when you finally read someone else, something about it being in a book, or you hear a podcast where someone else is talking about it, or perhaps read an article or something like that, go to a workshop, and someone suddenly says something that you thought, it like validates it. But it was always valid. It's not really validated because someone else is respecting you and responding to what you said, but it was always valid. And to trust in where you see growth possible and where you see leadership in a different way, and test it. Ask others how they receive it. Learn to trust yourself.
Yes, 100%. I have two lines of thought that came from that answer. The first one I hope to come back to is an example that you maybe can share about recognizing that the experience or what you had been so and so taught changed who you wanted to be as a leader. But the one that I think is more important is that feeling of being on the outside or that feeling of not belonging, because I know so many of our teens are feeling that extreme isolation, that extreme loneliness, that not belonging, that outsider feeling. Can you talk to that, how that impacted how you developed into your leadership?
That is a hard question, Lorraine.
I know.
And it touches some really sensitive, tender areas, right? I've really begun to contemplate as I look back over 50 plus years now about what I thought being an outsider is and what it really is, because it hurts when you're in it. I can say it's accounted for more than a few tears. That being said, it's you being you. And that's something really, just something I don't necessarily agree with. I don't know how to explain that. But I've learned that the people that I have gathered around myself over the course of my life, or the things that I have spent my time and attention on, have been so valuable. It doesn't matter if I'm doing them on the edge or what appears in the moment to be in the center. I actually was just watching The Chosen with the Bible study group here, and there's a good leader to watch who works consistently outside the margins purposely, and something that we need to really recognize, that being center stage isn't necessarily where all the work is done, and definitely not necessarily where all the important work is done.
Incredible. Just that one little piece of thinking of what my faith is and what our faith is, and how much of that journey was about being on the outside, intentionally being on the outside to bring
Most of our faith leaders, so I'm not even going to keep it, I'm obviously within a strain
right.
of Christianity, but if you think of that from an interfaith perspective and even take it outside of faith into civil rights and other things, most of the people that we now look back at as incredible leaders did not start from the center, and often purposely stayed out of the center. It's just that society saw that what they were doing was so impactful you couldn't turn away from them.
Profound. Yeah, as you say that, I'm thinking of all the things that I'm thinking about of leaders that I recognize, and I think, yes. Oh my gosh, again, yes, that ability to be on the outside, bringing people in.
Right. And some of them, from interfaith perspective, some of them left central positions to go to the outside. I'm thinking of the Buddha, for example, and choosing to not be within the hierarchy and saying, no, I'm going to work over here. Think of Mother Teresa. Where do you want to go? Calcutta. That's literally the edge of the world. Not literally, I shouldn't say literally, that's not right. But you understand what I mean. She
Yes.
chose to put herself out of that center stream. And there are so many examples of that we could just keep going with. But I think that is a profound thing to reflect on. When you are feeling like the outsider, don't feel sad that you're not necessarily in the center of whatever that specific moment is. Ask yourself, well, what can I do here then? What is this moment meant to teach me? And I may not always be here. Society shifts.
Yeah, and it makes me think I was just working with a teen last night. She's a freshman in high school and she wants to run for class president. And as we were working on her speech, we talked about what kind of president does she want to be? Does she want to be the one at the top of the mountain, or does she want to be the one who lifts others up into the position of the mountain? And when she was able to reflect and say, I don't want to be at the top, but I want to be the one who lifts the voices of others. It was like the speech wrote itself for her, and it was really cool. And then I challenged her and I said, when you have this window between saying your speech and right now, do you feel like you could spend your lunchroom time going to different tables and being a member of different groups? And she said, I can do that. And I would do it. Do that, because that's where you are doing more than just your words. You are showing with actions. And those are the leaders that people will follow.
Yeah, those are skills that are often not named, but deep listening to others and lifting them up. Because the reality is, no single person can do it all. We live in a time where there is so much information and so much going on. You cannot be an expert in it all. So I don't care what field you are exercising your leadership skills in. The best thing you can do is surround yourself with good people and then encourage them and do what you can to support them in their way of showing themselves. Whatever they want to achieve, how do you lift them up? How do you help them along their way? Because that's a leader.
It really is. And for her to be able to voice that at 14, I'm excited for her already.
But you just named something else that you offered, and I think this is important too. Part of leadership is having a good support team for your own mental health, and that means having mentors, and that
Mm,
means gathering a group of people. Like in ministry, we have these things called clergy community of practices, where I can speak with other clergy members that are dealing with many of the same problems, because reflection
mm.
matters. So you said that she was talking to you, you asked her a question, and then you helped her reflect back on it. And so the power of having someone like you coaching is so important. That doesn't make a weaker leader.
Mm.
I think it makes a stronger leader. Things like coaching, things like therapy, things like dealing with your own. I was talking about issues around family of origin, recognizing them, naming them, working through them, finding people to collaborate with. And one that I did not do well, but I work on now, finding mentors, finding people that you admire, that do it well, and not being afraid to write them a note, give them a call, send them an email and say, I really admire you for X, Y, and Z. I really wonder if you could spare an hour to talk to me or have a specific request. And you might find that it leads to a lifelong relationship. I've heard of so many people and experienced it in small ways, but so many people where that mentorship has changed the course of their lives.
Yes. And I think about, as I look back on my life, the times where I had the most growth was when I was connected to somebody who I saw had the skills that I wanted to develop.
Hmm.
And I also have been reflected back from them that I helped them grow in their own skills. And that was something that as a teacher was a real miss for me. I made those connections happen for kids where I would pair two, one who was stronger than the other in the academics, but I didn't highlight the value that the student who wasn't as strong in the academic, I didn't highlight the value that they were bringing to the relationship. And that for me is like, oh, if I could go back to teaching and I could do it all over again, I would really reinforce that when you pair those kids together, they are equally building each other up, and highlighting that for kids would be so cool.
And I think that's why mentors agree to be mentors because they are aware of that, that they recognize that it is a mutual relationship, that as much as they are outpouring, they are also inpouring. And it causes them to have a different lens to look on their own life about what maybe they didn't learn. And often mentors are usually some gap in age, and that we can learn as much from people that are far younger from us as we can from people that are older than us. And so I think mentors, that's why we admire them. They're open to learning. And
Mhm.
this for them is a way of learning. So don't look at it that you are just asking them for something that you need. You are giving them an opportunity that they might not otherwise have to work with an up and coming leader.
I love that so much. When you and I were having a conversation about the work that I'm doing, you said something so profound to me that I have just been thinking about a lot lately. And it's that you reflected that the work that I'm doing with students and young adults is perhaps a calling for me. And so I would love for you to share what a calling is and how calling came to you or evolved into what you're doing right now.
Okay, first, I just want to name that some of the language that I'm going to use is very specific to ministry and not completely, but certainly within the Christian realm. So please adapt it wherever your personal background comes from. It is not meant to dissuade or discourage or anyone else. And I do not claim it as only in the Christian realm. It just happens to be where I sit. That's what I can speak of. And so a calling in my setting is where do you hear, and I use that word loosely, the divine within your life. I believe that each human being is created by God. Yes, I believe in evolution, but so think of this a little metaphorically, that God has created each being with innate goodness and that every person in this world is precious, and without any single one of them, the whole cannot be complete. The idea of wholeness and shalom, our Jewish brothers and sisters use that word shalom, is deeply important. And so with that, we are not meant to be replicated one of the and the other. We are not, we are the same and we are completely unique at the same time. Both of those things are true. And so, what is it in you? What have you been given that is unique within you that when you let it sprout within you, the world needs? So, the calling is, I guess, the best way I can name it is like that innate DNA that one day, perhaps as a young child, you're doing something and you're like, I love that. It speaks, and boy, this was an aha moment in my life. It speaks in its bliss, the idea that callings don't feel like weights upon your shoulders. They feel like opportunities to do something beautiful and wonderful, and you can literally feel the excitement tingle inside of you. And the beauty of a call is it leads to your vocation, calling, Latin, vocation for life, that these are not jobs and careers that we're heading towards, that these are ministries, the ministry of all believers, that if we all bring our passions to fruition, then the world is a better place for it. And so I encourage people frequently to find what brings them joy. And I wish I could remember it, and I'm not going to get it right. One of the theologians, Buchner, I believe it was Buchner, I'll have to look it up afterwards, that said something about where your joy and the world's need meets is where you find your calling and your future. And so we'll have to look that up so we can actually cite it correctly for everyone. Isn't that an aha moment? I think that's such an aha moment. And if you don't feel it, move, try something else. And that doesn't mean that there aren't days that aren't hard or challenging. Okay. That doesn't mean that there aren't times that you just are doing work. But in an overarching idea, who are you? And when you're at your best, what do you have to offer the world in a way that is both enlivening to you and also helps the world in some way?
You couldn't have said it better, and you couldn't have hit the nail on the head for me in our conversation before and then now, because it really does bring me immense joy to do the work that I'm doing. And I see a dramatic need for it. And to know that I'm able to provide that opportunity for others, it's priceless.
Well, and it changes everything to realize that's what God is asking of us. God doesn't want our pain and our suffering. God wants joy and abundance. And I really think it has both a personal and a communal aspect to it. Where we find our bliss, it also affects the world's peace and tranquility and thriving.
Amazing and exciting and daunting.
Yes.
Because I think so many of us are numb to so many things that we don't hear our calling and we don't feel the passion. And I know that I was numb for probably 5 to 7 years doing something that I loved, truly loved, but it wasn't serving the calling that I so desperately wanted to do. And so when I figured it out, it was like the light and the veil, everything had lifted for me, and I could not go back. It wasn't a choice anymore.
And I think it's important to recognize, because I want to reframe that for you just a little bit, Lorraine, because you're still in that same vein. You've just tilted it. And so we cannot dissuade or disarm or forget that every opportunity that we have brings us clarity about where to go. So the only thing that becomes a little bit foolish is when we refuse to move on. It's like a snake shedding its skin. That the skin that has been shed wasn't bad or wrong or anything like that. It served its purpose for the time it was there. And there comes a time when it's time to let go, or you're going to suffocate yourself. And so I think that is true. And I also think in my own calling situation, why have I only been an ordained minister for, 8 years now, since 2015, almost 9 years? Because the societal norms around me didn't show me that this was even a possibility. As you said so nicely in your opening, I have been in ministry almost literally since I was born. Through Sunday school, I became a Sunday school teacher. I was in Bibles. I was constantly at the church. I was constantly doing things. And why didn't someone say, have you ever thought of going? I explain to people, literally going into ministry would have been like someone saying to me, would you like to be the president of the United States? Or would you like to be an astronaut? And it's sad to say that even for me, 88 is my graduating year from high school, 92 was my undergraduate degree, women in ministry was rare. And sadly, even today, the majority of ministers are men, not by a little, but by a landslide. That's not true in my particular denomination, but even in my own particular denomination, it's still almost like 50-50. I would have to look up the actual percentage wise. But I think nationally, in all ministries, it's pathetic. I don't even think we make up like 20%. And so you don't realize, and this is something we're talking about more and more, that when we don't show people like us, and what I mean by that is whoever you are, whatever you embody, when you don't see someone else like you doing the thing you love to do, you may not even realize that you can. And yes, there are people that end up shattering the glass ceiling, as we say metaphorically, but that's really hard and takes a toll on the heart and the soul. And you are critiqued. And I would say there are still ways that I am critiqued that many of my male colleagues just aren't. So much so, there are still many people who do not accept women as preachers and therefore will not even talk or relate to me. And it's very funny if my husband's around and someone comes to the church in my old setting, they would often go to him first. And he would take great glee in going, no, you want her.
I love that.
And that was in a pretty progressive, that's Massachusetts. That's a pretty progressive area where there are many women ministers now.
Can you share then a pivotal moment that allowed that calling to become clearer to you, or a pivotal moment or experience from your journey?
There are so many, but I'll give you one for just a moment. So there was a time period when I facilitated the alternative route to certification for the state of Connecticut for teachers, where there were shortages. You would go into this class so that you could accelerate your way through school and be prepared to go out into mathematics and social studies and so forth. And so all I did was I was a facilitator for them. And one of the things I would make sure that their internet might work or whatever they needed to do. I would check in the students, all those fun things. Anyway, there was a particular day when a student, female student, said, I have to be absent. I'm getting ordained. And I can tell you, she was not in my particular denomination. I didn't even know her religious background. It didn't really matter. I think I physically felt like lightning fly through my body. I can tell you exactly the moment where we were standing, even to this day. That was long before I took any steps. But let me tell you, I got her name and number. And I connected. I was like, you can have the day off, and I want to know more. And I think another pivotal moment, similarly, that is important was a time that happened much later than that, when I walked in on a conversation that was happening between another person and the pastor where I was. And that person was asking about ministry. And I was like, ooh, I need to hear more. And I edged into the conversation. And the other person left the conversation. And I said to the pastor, I said, I have to acknowledge that I'm feeling the same thing. And he literally said back to me, he said, I don't know about her, but you. And this is what I think was beautiful about what he did, because he not only affirmed that I would do well in ministry, but he said, here are the steps forward. And he told me about Andover Newton. He connected me to Andover Newton, where I have my master's degree from. And he made it possible for me to go. He said, just go visit it. You don't have to make a decision today. Just go visit. And that has a power that we can't even understand. I think it's important to affirm other people, to let other people know what you think they do well, and to really help them form themselves. And that's well and good. But if you don't know what to do with it, that's rough. So having someone that then takes that next step and says, let me tell you more. So be willing to ask questions and be willing to hear answers.
I love that. And that just leads into the advice that I would love for you to share. What advice do you have to offer our young teens about the calling or the movement towards your purpose in life? And how can we guide them a little bit?
Such a big question.
I only ask big questions.
Yes, you do. It's such an important question. I think first I would want my young self and my children to recognize, and everyone that's listening to recognize, when you're young, you think it's all right in front of you and that everything you do, it's all like there's so much weight on you, so much weight to have it all together and know where you're headed. I encourage you to let it go a little bit and instead let the rhythm of the river bring you along. Pay attention to your surroundings. Pay attention to what excites you. Pay attention to opportunities that are offered, to at first say yes to as many things as you can that bring you that delight, so that you can kind of taste test things. I'm a former Girl Scout, so dabble and get a sense. And then when you get that sense, don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to say no, because other people might see wonderful skills and talents in you because you are a talented human being. But if it's pulling you away from what you want to do and what you believe your right and true calling is, that's not the way to go. And you need to be strong enough to say no. So both stretch it out, dabble, try new things. Don't be afraid to break the edges and say no. And then if you end up traveling down one road and it's not the road that you anticipated, you find something out that you're like, I can no longer do this. My undergraduate degree is in elementary education. There's a long story that y'all don't need to hear, but I would tell you I ended up homeschooling my own children. Okay. I'm not saying you need to homeschool your children. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is what I learned. I'm the blessing product of what was called open classroom, what I envisioned education to be, and what I learned public education in general to be were not the same thing. And what I recognized for me and for my family, not for everybody, was that was not where I wanted to take us. And boy, was that a hard pivot. I had to really go against the flow of my friends. It was actually funny. They gave me a year. They were like, "Oh, you'll come back." And I was like, "No." And that meant after a year of what they thought was my complete insanity, some of them disappeared because that was just like a bridge too far. I was on fringe, fringe, fringe. And it was the most important thing I ever did for my family. I don't regret that decision. And no, each part of your life has a different season. And
Mm,
again, like that snake skin, it is okay to shed your skin and move into a different direction. And you will find that all of those different pieces come together some way, that you don't leave them behind. There's a period in my life, which goes along with the homeschooling, where because my mother got sick and died of cancer, that I worked at the family business. I went originally just to make sure payroll was done. Clearly, that's not education, but that's where life brought me at that time. And I worked in that company for, gosh, more than 10 years. And that's just literally a family business. You always work at a family business, but paid family business. And you could say that took me off course, but now I have a different view and can see that so many of the skills I learned about budgeting, about how business works, about management, about advertising, all of those things, which I just actually took some courses on as well, have absolutely helped me as a minister. In fact, nowadays, and again, I would say talk about how things change. If you go to Andover Newton, which is now embedded in Yale University, you are required to take a business class. So here, I had this from my history. It was not a traditional part of seminary degree, right? My master's in divinity. It was not traditionally, but now it is.
I want to end there because I love how you described you just don't know what you're going to experience and how it's going to help you, because that is the lesson of life. And I want to thank you so much for being here and agreeing to do this for my audience. I think we've all learned so much today.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk. And in my language, I offer blessings to you and to everyone listening. Trust yourself. Trust that you were created to do something great in this world. And great doesn't necessarily mean gigantic. You can do something great by just listening and sitting and sharing with someone else. You can be great by creating a painting that impacts the world. I'm actually sitting over a great art installation downstairs. It's what, 9 pictures? It could literally change people's perspective on immigration. That's power. And so learn to listen to yourself, reflect on where you've been, and seek that passion that's within you. So, in my language, may God bless you all.
I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorraine.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other parents who might benefit from this conversation. Together, we can support our teens in building healthy, positive relationships and become leaders of tomorrow. Until next time, I'm Lorraine Connell, and this is Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans.